according to a new statement that was put out by the CDC, it turns out that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is no longer available here in the United States. Specifically, here's what their statement says, quote, "The Janssen COVID-19 vaccine is no longer available in the U.S. All remaining U.S. government stock of Janssen COVID-19 vaccine expired on May 7, 2023. Dispose of any remaining Janssen COVID-19 vaccine in accordance with local, state, and federal regulations." Meaning that the U.S. government has stopped purchasing the Johnson vaccine. All of the remaining vaccines that they did purchase already actually expired 10 days ago now, and therefore all doses in the U.S. are to be discarded. Furthermore, in regards to the people who have already received the Johnson vaccine, well, the CDC gave some recommendations. Here's what they wrote, quote, "People ages 18 years and older who received 1 or 2 Janssen COVID-19 vaccine doses are recommended to receive 1 bivalent mRNA dose of either Moderna or Pfizer at least 2 months after completion of the previous dose." Now, for your reference, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was 1 out of 4 different vaccines that were approved for use here within the U.S. Those 4 vaccines were the Pfizer mRNA vaccine, Moderna's mRNA vaccine, Johnson's adenovirus vaccine, and the Novavax, which contains a nanoparticle version of the spike protein. However, with the Johnson vaccine officially off the market, there are only 3 players left. Now, in terms of how we actually got to this point, you might remember that back in February of 2021, U.S. regulators gave the Johnson & Johnson vaccine emergency use authorization. And compared to the other 2 vaccines that were available on the market at that time, meaning the Pfizer and Moderna shots, the Johnson vaccine became, you can say, popular because, for one, it required only 1 dose, and secondly, it was not based on mRNA technology. Instead, the Johnson vaccine was a traditional vaccine based on adenovirus technology. However, the use of the Johnson vaccine was slowed down almost to a grinding halt when exactly 1 year ago, the FDA released an official statement, you can see it up on your screen, announcing that they will be severely restricting the use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine due to serious concerns of a blood clotting disorder. Here's specifically what they said, the FDA said in their statement, which was again released almost exactly a year ago today. Quote, "After conducting an updated analysis, evaluation, and investigation of reported cases, the FDA has determined that the risk of thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome, otherwise known as TTS, a syndrome of rare and potentially life-threatening blood clots in combination with low levels of blood platelets with onset of symptoms approximately 1 to 2 weeks following administration of the Janssen COVID-19 vaccine, warrants limiting the authorized use of the vaccine." And so essentially the FDA changed their recommendation for the Johnson shot to only people who are either allergic to mRNA vaccines or just wouldn't take the mRNA shot no matter what. And as such, the U.S. government at that point stopped the purchase of these Johnson & Johnson shots. Now, the severe condition in question here, the one that was mentioned in that statement, is known as TTS, thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome, which is a very technical name, but in plain English, this syndrome presents itself as a combination of blood clots as well as a drop in platelet levels. And what's interesting to note is that TTS is actually a new syndrome that was only identified recently after the rollout of the vaccines. In fact, TTS also goes by 2 other names. It's also called vaccine-induced prothrombotic immune thrombocytopenia, or VIPIT for short, or you can also call it vaccine-induced immune thrombotic thrombocytopenia, or VITT for short. However, regardless of what you actually call it, TTS is extremely serious. And typically, individuals experience the symptoms of TTS sometime between 4 and 42 days after being vaccinated. And the symptoms can vary wildly, depending on where the thrombosis actually occurs. So for instance, here are just some of the potential symptoms. You have cerebral venous thrombosis, which manifests as persistent headaches, vision changes, seizures, confusion, or even potentially a coma. You have splanchnic vein thrombosis, which can manifest as abdominal pain. You have pulmonary embolus, which can manifest as chest pain as well as shortness of breath. You have deep vein thrombosis, which can result in leg pain, redness, and or swelling. You have arterial ischemia, which can lead to symptoms of a heart attack, such as chest pain and shortness of breath. And then lastly, you have thrombocytopenia, which can lead to bruising, rashes, as well as general bleeding. And it's really worth mentioning that no matter how TTS actually manifests, it's very serious and can lead to long-term disability or even death if it's not recognized and treated in a timely manner. And what the regulators over at the FDA discovered was a link between TTS and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. As just one example, according to this paper right here, which was published in November of 2021, researchers with the CDC found that people who got the Johnson shot were far more likely to experience TTS when compared to people who received either the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine. In that paper, the researchers were looking at the number of adverse reactions which were reported through the VAERS system. Now, the VAERS system, in case you've never heard of it before, stands for the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. It's run jointly by the FDA alongside the CDC, and it's a place where people can report any adverse reactions that they have experienced after getting a vaccine. And so, when those researchers actually looked at the data in the VAERS system, specifically in regards to TTS, here are the numbers that they uncovered. There were 3.55 cases of TTS reported for every million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine which was administered, compared to only 0.0057 cases per million for the other vaccines. Meaning that although it's still rare no matter which shot a person takes, the instance of it happening with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was a whopping 621 times more than the others. And it's also worth mentioning that different groups experienced TTS at different rates. When they looked at middle-aged women, that number was actually 8 per million doses for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And so following the FDA's restrictions last year, the federal government, they were no longer purchasing the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And now that the supply that they had purchased previously is officially expired, they have now come out with a statement and said that, well, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is no longer available in the U.S. at all. And forgetting for a moment the human cost of all this, in terms of the financial cost here, this back and forth vaccine drama will cost the U.S. taxpayer a cool $125 million. Because you see, back in the year 2020, the U.S. government agreed to pay about $1 billion for 100 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Doing the math, that amounts to about $10 per vaccine. However, the federal government did not actually complete the full purchase, and instead, they only bought about 31.5 million doses. Then, in total, as of this month, as of May, 19 million people here in the U.S. received the Johnson shot, meaning that 12.5 million doses will go to waste, which, if you do the math, is approximately $125 million worth of shots. Think about all the missiles for Ukraine we could have bought with that money. Regardless, Johnson & Johnson had an earnings call just last month wherein the executives in the company, they said that they no longer expect to have COVID vaccine sales moving forward. Here's what Johnson & Johnson's chief financial officer said on that particular call, quote, "We do not anticipate material sales beyond that which were recorded in the first quarter as our contractual commitments are complete." Hey Roman, it's me, calling you with the help of today's sponsor, Patriot Mobile. Listen, for years now, we've just had to put up with the fact that our wireless providers are funneling millions, or in some cases billions of dollars to all these causes that we don't necessarily agree with. But now there's an actual solution. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider that offers dependable nationwide coverage on all three major networks, so you can get the best possible service in your area, no matter where you live, without all the propaganda that's being pushed by these different companies that are effectively destroying this country. When you make the switch to Patriot Mobile, you're supporting things like free speech, the sanctity of life, the Second Amendment, as well as all of our veterans, first responders, and cops who essentially make the country what it is. And best of all, their 100% US-based customer service lines, well, they make the switch super simple. And so either click on the link below this video or head on over to patriotmobile.com/Roman and use promo code Roman to get free activation today. That way, today, you can get awesome wireless service while at the same time having a clean conscience, knowing that your money isn't actually being funneled to all these causes that you don't necessarily agree with. Again, the link will be down there in the description box below. Check him out, and now let's have him back to the studio. Now, just for your reference, if right now you go over to the FDA's website, you will find that the emergency use authorization for the Johnson vaccine is still viable. Although that authorization is only for adults who choose to receive the vaccine because they, quote, would not otherwise receive a COVID-19 vaccine. However, regardless of the fact that it is still technically authorized, it's no longer physically available here in the US. If you'd like to go deeper into anything that we discussed in today's episode, including a deeper analysis on this TTS condition, I'll throw all my research notes down into the description box below this video for you to check out. And then lastly, I'd like to mention that over on Epic TV, our awesome no censorship video platform, I just published an exclusive episode detailing how bureaucrats within the federal government are overriding the medical opinions of actual doctors and choosing to not compensate the victims of vaccine injuries. Specifically, according to government documents that we here at the Epic Times were able to review, it turns out that U.S. officials within the government's compensation program, meaning the bureaucrats within the system, they have been rejecting people's vaccine injury applications despite the fact that medical doctors have diagnosed these people with having vaccine injuries. I repeat, medical doctors diagnose people with having vaccine-induced injuries, but the bureaucrats in charge of actually compensating these people just refuse to do so. If you'd like to check out that awesome episode, the link to it will be right there at the very top of the description box. Just click on that link and you can head on over to Epic TV and watch that episode right away. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epic Times. Stay informed. Most importantly, stay free.